Hello and welcome to episode 22 of Pitchmasters with me, your host, Danny Fontaine. This week I speak to Hilary Salzman, the Business Storyteller. We talk about why we should tell stories in business, the science behind creating emotional connections, and frameworks that you can immediately start using to create your own compelling stories. We also talk about the challenges that women face in male-dominated industries, overcoming imposter syndrome, and we have an open discussion on whether ChatGPT has a role in storytelling. So grab a drink, sit back, relax, and get ready to take some notes. Hilary Salzman, what a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Oh, thank you, Danny.
I always start by asking my guests to introduce themselves. How do you pitch yourself and how do you pitch your business as well?
Yes, super question. I feel like I'm going to be tested.
You are.
Now.
This is a test.
Okay. So I am a business storyteller, and essentially what I do is I help people discover and use their authentic voice to pitch themselves, to pitch their business, to pitch their services, their products, to talk about their businesses in a way which is much more human. So it's kind of moving away from that I do this and you should buy from me because I'm really good to where do we find those human connections? How do we build audiences and engage with them so that we have trusted relationships? So people naturally want to buy from us. They naturally want to tell other people about us because we've got those lovely connections. So I work on a couple of levels. One is from the very sort of brand story perspective. So working out what the story of a brand is, from the initial vision, the purpose, the values of that organization, so that they've got a consistent voice when they talk about themselves. And then I work with individuals or with teams, bringing in their own experiences, their own stories, and just creating that lovely kind of storytelling culture within an organization and working to get those stories out through their campaigns, through whatever channel it is they're marketing to. And yes, it's all about stories.
Fantastic. Now, I am a huge storytelling nerd, so we're going to get into the nitty-gritty in just a moment. But how did you end up being a storyteller? How does one end up in this position?
It's a great question. I've got a bit of a cheesy answer, but I think I've literally always been a storyteller. So when I was tiny, that was what I did. From the minute I could write, I wrote tons and tons of stories. And my parents have still got these little books, stapled together storybooks. And there was a whole load of floppy disks at one point. That shows how old I am. Where I used to record these, write down my stories. And it was just the natural thing that came to me. I had a very vivid imagination and I loved to write. So as I kind of progressed through school, I was like, all right, what can I do with my writing? And initially I was going along the path to be a journalist. That seemed like the obvious way to tell other people's stories for them. But, paths go wiggly, don't they? Things happen. And and so I ended up in the corporate world doing marketing, right. Slightly different. And it was still, I was writing on the side, and, this was in the late 90s, early 2000s in IT software. There's really not much scope for kind of creativity and storytelling. And I kind of, I cut my teeth and worked across different channels and did a load of partner marketing. But it was always there in the background that I was thinking, I just don't believe the stuff that I'm creating. I don't believe the content. It's, why are we saying, we're really good because we think we are? We've got the best bit of software because we have. And, what about the people? And it was just, I just remember having conversations with leaders in that tech space in the 2000s. And they were just like, storytelling? No, don't be ridiculous. Right. Let's just talk about how great our widget is. And I think, so I spent a long couple of decades in IT and tech, and, it just that constant niggle about we've got to connect more with the humans. And that to me is the obvious bit of storytelling. So I went through a bit of a journey. I worked for Vodafone for quite a few years. Vodafone Business, and I was kind of pushing the early days of value propositions. So again, moving away from that kind of functional selling on price and things, and actually how do we put the customer at the heart of it? And I did a big sales transformation program with the enterprise team. And for me, then that was like the light at the end of the tunnel. And I was thinking, oh, hang on, that people are buying into this now. People are saying, okay, well, think about the customer. Right. and that was kind of my in. And I was like, right, what's the next stage on from a value proposition? And it was really that kind of like, right, this is where storytelling can come into its own. And I was experimenting with different organizations. As I say, there was still quite a lot of reluctancy to it. And it was like, oh, it's just a fad. It's just everyone's talking about it. And it's, we don't need to go down that route. But the more and more I did it, the more I realised how effective it was, but also how much I loved it. Right. And that's about 4 years ago. I was running an agency for quite a few years in the IT and telecom space. And then, about 4 years ago, I thought I just feel so strongly about this storytelling element. I've just got to just do that. And so I stepped down from the board and I set up 22 Stories, my organisation now. And it's all I do. And it is, it's that, again, it's really cliche, but it is that kind of, if you love what you do, you never work. I mean, I do work. It doesn't feel quite like that. I mean, it is bloody hard work. But I am, it is everything to me. It is, and I work with such interesting people, and I just love that process of light bulb moments when people finally start to kind of realize, oh, actually I can see the potential in this, and it's great. It's empowering, and there's a big side of it as well that comes from my own personal story with finding my voice. I really struggled in my early probably the first 15 years of my career, of feeling like I didn't have a voice, I didn't have a right to have an opinion, and it's so I had a lot of kind of self-development and self-learning around using my own story and being comfortable with my own story. And so that's all part of it as well. And so, as well as helping people pitch their businesses, it's about helping them understand their own story and really feel that they have the right to have a story, because sadly there's still a lot of people out there that don't think that they have that right. And and that's why I work quite hard, especially with women and underrepresented groups, to to really get their stories out there as well.
What is it you think that makes people feel like they don't have that right to tell a story?
I think it's a combination of things, and I think especially for women, in my own experiences, it was the way that we were brought up. I had a grandmother who just keep quiet, don't be emotional, just nod along, and that's what we do. And if you have a feeling, keep it inside. And I think it's changing now. I was born in 1980, and I think that generation was very much like that. But I think I've got a teenage daughter now, and I see the difference in her. I don't think she'll have those struggles that I had, definitely. And I think it's society as well. I think I think in business in particular, there is this, certainly when I was working in large corporates, this idea that you've got to toe the line a bit. And I think, so it's kind of, you feel something, you feel you've got an opinion, you've got a voice, and it's like, oh, hang on, do I want to upset the apple cart? Am I going to get told not to? And especially for women, I really do think it's been a hard slog to kind of feel that voice. And I used to sit in meetings, and I mean this in no way offensive, but you'd have a large amount of men. It was the IT world. There was a lot of men, not many women in my space. And they just come in and they'd have all these ideas. Like, yeah, that's great. And they'd get emotional, and they would bang fists on the table, and everyone would cheer. We're like, yay! And then we would do it. Women would do it, and we would get excited. We'd get told off. Oh, stop! You're so emotional. You don't need to be emotional. Or I remember being accused of being a bully, and I'm like nowhere near a bully in the slightest, but I had opinions, and it was just so I think there's a whole load of stuff that's happened. And I think now as well, with social media, people are under so much more scrutiny. So, a lot of my customers, they'll go and they'll tell their story and they use their voice, and then people will go, oh, why have you done that?
Right.
And they'll get the trolls, and all it takes is someone saying, oh, you shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
And it knocks your confidence. And if lots of people are saying that, maybe it's a boss, maybe it's someone out in the community, whatever it is, eventually you think, actually, no, I'm scared now. I'm going to go inside myself, which is a real shame, because I work with so many amazing people, and at the start of the process, they're scared of their voice, they're scared of their stories, and it's a lovely transformation to see. But it's equally, it's not good that we're still in this place now that people are afraid to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I work in the IT consulting industry. And of course, it's still male dominated. There's no getting around it. No matter what companies are striving to do, it's certainly not there yet. Do you have any advice for women listening in a male dominated industry, either young or experienced, based on what you've been through, to help them with any of that, kind of as a philosophy, maybe?
Yeah, I again, I don't think it's any big sort of rocket science, but I think it is about really getting to grips with who you are and what you stand for, and being at peace with that. And kind of, if you've got a clear story, if you know yourself, what you're trying to achieve, why you're in that role, what you're doing, that kind of gives you a platform. It gives you an area to say, right, okay, I'm going to put my feet in here and I stand for this. And I think, it does help. In my experience, it helps because it just gives you a bit of power, and it gives you a bit of control, and it gives you a check and balance.
Yeah.
And I say this with, when I talk to people about their personal brand storytelling and things like that, is, it's a great place to come back to when the world knocks you off kilter. So if something happens in your work environment that you're not comfortable with, you can kind of reflect back on your values or on your purpose and say, right, okay, does that fit with what I really want to be doing? Is that, if I say yes to this guy that's asked me to do something that feels uncomfortable, is it going to compromise my values? Is it going to support my purpose? And so you've just got something to say to make those decisions easier, and to go, you know what? No, I don't agree with that. That's completely against my values. It's not going to support where I'm going. And, and being able to kind of have some substance to talk on. It's hard, but I think, and I think we rely a lot on leaders, and I think trailblazers. So I think, again, I, as hard as it's been for me over the years to do it, I know that every time I use my voice to speak out against something that isn't right, other people in the room are going to be helped by that. And so again, that's if it's scary, then just know that if you're doing it, you're helping a much bigger kind of society change. So we all have a kind of a role to play in that, definitely. And I think that's kind of would be advice, just to think of yourself as a trailblazer, and as if it's difficult, then just know that you're helping someone else somewhere by doing it.
So let's move on to storytelling. Let's start with the basics. Let me ask you this question. In business, I think I know some people, especially in technical businesses, think that this kind of juxtaposition of solid business and technical sales is too far reaching a juxtaposition to bring in emotional stories. Why should we tell stories in business?
Because it's built into our DNA to tell stories. I mean, this, we're talking about being storytelling nerds. This is where the nerdy stuff comes in, and this is what I get really excited about. So, storytelling isn't anything new. Storytelling has been part of our evolution. It's one of the reasons why we survived as a species, was because of our ability to tell stories, and that idea of kind of, being able to deal with the world around us by creating stories. And so it isn't it isn't some newfangled thing. It
Right.
is actually, there's bits of our brain. Our brain, works in story. That's how our brain can look at loads of data and it can find patterns in data, but it can also find patterns in stories. Our brains release certain chemicals when we hear stories, like chemicals that help make us more memorable, that
Right.
help build empathy, that help make us feel happy. So it's kind of like, it's not why would you, it's why wouldn't why wouldn't you do this stuff? Because at the end of the day, you've got some really good technology, but the technology is only there because of the people it's there to serve, and people have emotions. So if you're wanting to make whatever it is, brilliant products that you sell, memorable, if you want to build those relationships that are going to help you, get your renewals in and sell more, it is all about people. People buy from people, yada yada. But there's a reason behind that, and it's really true. And so storytelling is about making those connections. It's not some fluffy kind of like, we'll all have a big hug and they'll buy from us. It's not that at all. But it's about, creating that strong emotional connection to what you're selling. And that doesn't mean that, a network switch is going to fill you with joy, but it's part of that whole story, that actually, understanding what your audience are going through beyond just that kind of functional business stuff. It allows you to operate on a completely different level. It's tech world is so busy, there is so much noise and so little differentiation. I mean, I learned that from doing value propositions. And you try and talk to big IT companies. So, what's your USPs? And like, oh. And I think that's the thing. There is, technology has come on so far. It is very hard to differentiate. And, you go down, okay, well, we'll differentiate on our customer service. We'll differentiate on our customer experience. Yeah, great. Now everyone's got great customer experience. Right. So where do we go next? And I think it takes a smart business to understand that actually it is that human connection they need. And I think we all view the world differently as well. And I don't know whether it's off the back of COVID or just that the world's very difficult at the moment. But I think there's a sense that, what we're trying to achieve in business is more than just that day-to-day kind of increase in productivity, or, we are more. There is an idea that we want to change the world a bit. And, and I think you see it across supply chains now. Everyone needs to be able to prove like their sustainability credentials, for example. And that's impacting, if you go to procurement, you have to show that you've got a certain, you hit certain compliance. And so there's all these things, and it's not just because we're being forced to do that. It's because collectively we're wanting to make change. And I think, again, for businesses to understand that if they can tap into that kind of, the higher values of someone, the collective change that they want to be part of, it's just a really great way to differentiate themselves and build the strength of those relationships. Storytelling for me, it's the connection. And it's, for years I used to write in value propositions, we are a trusted advisor. And like, how many times have I written trusted advisor?
I get it all the time. My favorite, I've said it on this show before, but I ask people, why should a client choose us? And they say, because we are the safest pair of hands. No.
Oh yeah, we could probably do a whole hours and hours about all the things in corporate.
Exactly.
Definitely. But I think, so this is about kind of putting the money where the mouth is and saying, okay, actually we can be a trusted advisor, but that's not because, we've got 50 years experience or we've got this or we've got that. It's because actually we're on an emotionally connected level with you, and we get what's driving you, and it's not the things that we used to think it was. It's the human drivers, and that's where storytelling is really good at, creating those connections.
I completely agree. it still brings challenges for some people. And one of the things that I think it's worth clearing up is that people say to me, but I've got a pitch and it's 2 hours long. I can't tell a 2-hour story. Firstly, well, maybe you can. But secondly, I think the important thing for me is to make that emotional connection up front. You can still give information and facts and evidence and data, but the audience won't want to hear that information unless you make that emotional connection first.
Absolutely. And there's a reason for that. Again, it comes back to the science. So as I was saying about the brain creating chemicals, one of the chemicals it creates is oxytocin, which is for building empathy and things. And that is connected to the limbic system. So I'm not going to... Trust you, I'm not going to go too deep into this. I could, but I won't. But the limbic, so the phrase winning hearts and minds.
Right.
Well, the limbic system in your brain and your body is kind of connected to that idea of winning hearts and minds. So when we make decisions, like you alluded to, we make emotional decisions first. I think it's like 98% of our decisions are based on emotion, and it's the limbic system that guides that emotion. So it's the gut feel, the kind of, I don't know why I want to do this, but I just feel I have to. So that is how all of us make decisions, even people in procurement. Then they're not monsters. All of our brains work the same way. And so we make those emotional decisions, and then we seek the logic. We seek the facts and the figures to back up and reassure our neural systems that we're right in those decisions that we're making. So absolutely, if you've got a 2-hour pitch, I mean, you'd have to be an amazing storyteller to tell a 2-hour story, but I'm sure there are people out there that can do it. But absolutely, it's about grabbing hearts and minds at the beginning. So if you tell a story at the start of that pitch, and the story is about the people in the room, because stories are never about yourself. It's always about the person that you're talking to. If you put them in the heart of your story, you're going to be grabbing their attention, because you're not standing up and showing a slide with all your awards and accreditations on and saying how long you've been in business for. So tick number 1, you've already made people sit up and listen in the room. Telling a story will get these wonderful chemicals flowing. So they're going to be thinking about things on a different level. The emotions are going to be there. And they've almost, you pretty much will have made that decision in some form about you, if it's just a 2-minute story at the beginning. And then, sure, you've got the rest of the session to give them examples and to show them the facts and all of that. But it's, if you go in up front with all of those facts and figures, it's just boring. And it's just, there's no, and it's always, I've seen it so often. It's like, you've got to get all of that data in. And then the final slide is so what's in it for you? They're asleep. They clocked out, 90 minutes ago.
Yeah.
So it's, and it doesn't even need to be complicated storytelling. Sometimes it's just that mindset shift from thinking, okay, rather than starting talking about myself, I'm going to start talking about them. And it's human nature is to talk about ourselves, because we're slightly selfish people and it's easier. But again, just do something different at the beginning of a meeting, something which shows that you really empathize with them, that you understand what they're going through. But it is again, it's that trying to be a little bit more human about it. So standing up and trying to saying, oh, I really understand how difficult your job is, and it's a difficult climate out there. It's not it will have some impact, but it's not going to really wow them.
And it's interesting because it's human nature to want to talk about ourselves. But on the other side, it's human nature to want to hear about ourselves.
Yes.
And we're not in a two-way dialogue that we would have in the pub. When we meet someone for the first time, we must focus on the audience and give them what they want to hear.
Absolutely. And to me it sounds like that's such a simple answer, but it's it is the obvious thing. And I think so many people forget that. And it is exactly talking, making them the hero of that story, making them feel good, making them feel that you've invested in them. And, and it's that kind of ego stroking a bit as well. But it's just that, the idea that someone is actually talking directly to you. And, the most powerful stories and the most powerful kind of actions that are driven off the back of it come when somebody can see themselves in that story. It's like a mirror. You want your audience to kind of, be in that position without they're holding up a mirror and they're like, that is me.
Right.
You totally got me.
Right.
That's, how on earth did you know that about me? And it's also, storytelling is massively about presenting a future, because storytelling essentially is all about transformation. It's kind of how we go from one point to the other and what we learn in this. So as business storytellers, our responsibility is kind of to hold that mirror up, but to also then flip it out and show them what that future could look like for them. So it's connecting to where they are now so that they know that they're part of that story. It's not telling them too much. It's showing them things. It's leaving the gaps and enabling their brain to kind of fill in those gaps and put themselves into that story. And then it's showing them what that future could look like. And I think, especially in technology, for example, there's some really good opportunities to kind of to do that and to take them off into, not, it could be some crazy futuristic world if you were being really creative with it, but equally it could be 18 months time, 3 years time.
Right.
And again, not about, in 3 years' time, look at all the ROI you could have.
Yeah.
It's about kind of what they might have achieved for themselves personally. And I think, again, for salespeople, for marketeers, the investment needs to be upfront in really understanding your audience. Take the time to know who they are. There's so much information available in the public domain. Go on LinkedIn. See if they've got an Instagram, look at their Twitter, find their Facebook. There is such an opportunity, and it's a bit stalkerish. But I think, if again, we'd feel good if I was in a sales meeting and I was being sold to, and they'd taken the time to know, I don't know, where I went on holiday or what I enjoyed or what was really important to me. I think that would, again, that's part of that relationship building piece. And I've done it recently. Actually, I did some work for a software company, and their account-based marketing team. So they were looking at doing real one-on-one storytelling. So named accounts, C-level people. So we were targeting the CFOs and CEOs or a head of HR, and it was about creating something, which was just, it was the beginning of a nurture program. So it wasn't, it was that initial kind of door opener email that was going to go out to them. And I had great fun. I literally felt like a stalker. I trawled the internet, but it was amazing what you could find. And, so there was a female CFO. And after doing a bit of research, didn't take me that long, I realised that one of her biggest kind of drivers was gender pay equality, because she was all over it. Every bit of social media, every post she was liking was about this, and she'd been on panel sessions, and it's not rocket science stuff.
It's not.
And so all I did is I wrote this future facing story. I looked two years in advance to her standing up, being awarded, for the efforts that she had done within the organisation to remove the gap and basically succeed in having gender pay equality. And there was a little bit at the bottom that actually it was this quite fancy HR software that helped her do that because it identified where those gaps were. But that was right at the bottom. This was all about how she had achieved those things and how how good it felt for her, knowing that she had changed the lives of so many people within the organisation. That might have taken me 10, 15 minutes on the internet to find that out. And, so anyone can do that. A salesperson can do that, surely. And, even if it's just don't know, finding out what football team I did. That was another
Yeah.
one I did for a guy, and it was all about him celebrating his team being the top of the Premiership. And this is HR software, and so it's just someone to open that email or LinkedIn message and go, oh, hang on a minute, what?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's there's lots of fun ways that you can do it, and and it's all stuff, I think, which is capable. We're all capable of doing this stuff.
And again, it really helps make that quick distinction. You could say to the same person, we hope to get your company to a place where you will win an award. And they go, well, that sounds quite good. Or you can say, let me tell you about the year 2025 when Robert Smith stands up. And it's just that slight reframing, nearly of the same words. But the key is to get them to taste it.
Yes, absolutely.
It, right?
Yeah. And if it's, when it's really something like that, when you're saying, hey, this is a future where you've really succeeded and you've really achieved something, you can be really clever with the wording, using emotional wording and sensory wording as well will get them, oh yes, I can really see that. And it was all about, I talked about the sound of the applause in her ears and all, all of these different things that, it just make it a bit more realistic to them. And you want them leaving thinking, oh, okay, that sounds like a world which I'd like to be part of. And it's they're not going to sign the deal off the back of it, but it's the beginnings of those conversations. It's a great differentiator, but it's just that sign that you care about them. And I think it's a great way to build that initial relationship.
Another pushback that I sometimes get, which I imagine you've had as well, is that's fine, but in this instance, this person is so technical that he won't or she won't have any emotional response. They won't want to hear anything like that. It's too fluffy. All we've got to give them is the facts. What do you say to those people?
Oh, yeah, that's a really, really good question. And I think it does poor IT people a bit of a disservice, doesn't it? Yeah. Everyone has emotions. We know that. It's just about finding the right thing that's going to excite them, the thing that's going to turn them on. And actually, it might be data that turns them on. So if you know that, then you can kind of, you can use that as your hook. But it's still putting them at the heart of what you're talking about, and we can, the word fluffy is one that I come up with a
right.
lot. Oh, this is all fluffy and real businesses don't do this sort of stuff. We do, because, even if you've got someone that's incredibly technical, they still make decisions in the same way that everybody makes decisions.
Yes.
They're not robots.
No.
They're not any different. They possibly don't know another way to communicate their feelings externally, so they just talk in binary terms.
Right.
But it's I would say they are the harder, if harder nut to crack, definitely. But I think sometimes it's just to recognize that someone is very technical and kind of give them an opportunity to explore a different side of themselves or to see a potential different side of themselves. That could be enough to kind of,
They're a harder nut to crack, but when you do crack it, the results are even more impactful than a naturally emotional person. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And if you're trying to sell into a very large organization and you crack someone like that is to other stakeholders within that organization, that's the best advocate you can have. And it's great. And it's we all, again, talk about kind of making other people feel good. We want to feel good too. So if we're investing in trying something new and being storytellers ourselves, we want those success stories to to be able to tell other people and to share when we're trying to pitch ourselves out as storytellers. So I think it's worth trying the hard ones as well.
Couldn't agree more. So let's assume that any naysayers listening to this have been convinced now wholeheartedly. They say, great, you know what, Hilary, you're right, we've got to tell stories. And then they look at the blank piece of paper in front of them. How do we start? There's a lot of frameworks out there. Love to talk about all of them. How would you recommend we start this practical discussion on where to even start?
I mean, I think yes, there are tons of frameworks out there, and they're all based on very similar structures essentially, because there are only 7 plot types in the world. So however we tell a story always falls within one of those 7 plot types. And it was a huge university piece of research over lots and lots of years. So, it's about finding the one that works for you. But how do you do that? Do you want to read all the books? No, probably not. So, let's just start from scratch. And it's the beginning things. Don't worry about structure to start is one of the things that I would say. Start with the basics. Number one, who is your audience?
Yeah.
Sounds so basic. So many people forget it. And go niche. So, we trying to tell one story to everybody, it's not worth you trying to do. You want to really know who your audience is. You want to take the time to understand them, understand their kind of table stake needs, understand those basic things that they need, and then understand what they need emotionally as well. So if you're looking at, doesn't have to be a named individual, but if you were targeting HR directors, for example, as part of the campaign, creating a persona of your HR director, working out kind of what their life looks like outside of the office as well as internally. What are they trying to achieve outside of their KPIs, basically? What are the things that they're trying to do with their lives? Are they trying to get out of HR? Are they trying to get a seat on the board? Are they trying to just get some money because they want to go off and, I don't know, buy a house in Barbados? Whatever it is, what are the things that they're scared of? What do they wake up in the middle of the night? What are the things that plague them? What would help them feel better? What would help them feel more joyful? So working out who your audience are and creating those personas is the number one thing for any story. So that's the starting point, because in doing that, you're figuring out what problem you're solving. And that's what we know. Again, that's a kind of, the basic thing, who your audience are, what's the problem you're solving for them, and what's the outcome you want. Why are you writing that story? What are you trying to do? Are you doing it because you're trying to recruit a load of people to come onto a webinar for you? Do you want them to book a sales meeting off the back of it? Do you want them to, is it further down the sales journey and actually, the stories are there to kind of push them over the line? They're there or thereabouts ready to sign up, but they just need that last validation. So being really clear on the outcome of your story. The emotional outcome as well. So not just the kind of call to action thing, but also how you want someone to feel when they read your story. Do you want them to feel excited, joyful, optimistic, hopeful, scared, whatever it might be, again. So all of a sudden, you still haven't got any words pretty written down on your blank bit of paper, but you've got these understandings of what you want that story to do and what you want it to feel. And then it's kind of, once you know what it is you're trying to do, you can think, okay, do I need to tell a real story? Could it be a customer story that I can tell? Do I need to tell a story which is, much more fictionalized? Is it something that I can create? Is it, can I use elements of my own experience in it? What's my wisdom? How do I share that? And then, then you're starting to think about structure. And, there are, hero's journey.
Let's talk about it. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
My favorite, of course.
Yeah. I'm not sure of the relevance of hero's journey so much anymore.
Right.
And I will tell you why. There's a few reasons, but it is, it's the basis of story brand, for example. So Donald Miller's story brand used across so many large businesses and it works, and it's essentially a story version of the whole normal case study of problem, solution, benefit. It's just a kind of a way to make that more interesting. I think for me, the hero's journey is quite restrictive. One, I think just the language hero is kind of a bit outdated nowadays, and it kind of I mean, there'd be tons of views on that. One day I'm going to put this on LinkedIn and just sit back and wait for the scorn. But yeah, I think the hero's journey, essentially, it is a good plot type, but it's focusing very much on just kind of, one person achieving one thing. And a couple of years ago, it worked really well because the hero's journey is about transformation. It's change. It's about someone going on a quest to solve their problem, and they meet a guru along the way, and you can put yourself as the guru, and you give them a plan, and they leads them to success, and it's all wonderful, and we're all happy at the end. But it is that very much that individual success, and it does work in certain terms. But like I was saying earlier, I think nowadays we're looking for more kind of collective success, and it's not so much about that kind of one person trying to get somewhere and be something. It's how we can impact society. What is the collective narratives here? And I think for me it's one of there's two plot types in particular that I really like. One is journey of discovery, which is kind of where you can go off into a different world and learn all this stuff about you, and you come back and the world hasn't changed particularly, but you've changed. So Wizard of Oz, that type of thing. Or overcoming the monster. So if you think of Stranger Things. So the show Stranger Things. So in Overcoming the Monster plot, it's about a community of people coming together to collectively beat down that monster. And so it is, I think it's more reflective of how we are as a society now versus the hero journey. And so in a business perspective, Overcoming the Monster becomes a really interesting, playful plot, because that monster could be anything. It could be, I don't know, it could be the board members, it could be the economic climate, it could be, a particular problem within that organization. But I think, it's that ability to tell a story where you are fighting a broader problem. And, maybe that broader problem is something like gender equality, maybe it's climate change, and so again, for a business, or especially a technology company, to show that they're part of that fight, and actually their software is kind of, or for example, their software is part and parcel, but actually the way that they do it and what that does to the organization helps them together to overcome this bigger monster that's sat over there. I just think it's a more representative kind of view. What do you think?
Well, I really like that one, especially because it's not just, here's a monster, we'll defeat it. To your example of Stranger Things, it requires courage and bravery, and it requires people to reach inside of themselves and find a person in there that they didn't even know existed. So it's got that transformation story in as well. But it also brings in a huge amount of emotion when you are overcoming fear to beat the monster as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think fear is one of those great emotions that, no matter where we are in our lives, we can all understand fear and all know that feeling. And I think fear is a really useful emotion in storytelling when you're looking at things like strategic change. So if you're trying to sell big change programs in and things, then understanding fear can help you get that connection. I did some work a while ago with a lady who was a senior sales leader, and she was staying within the same organization, but moving into a newly created strategic role. And she was about to start a really big program of change, completely changing the way that they structured their sales channel. And so it was, big impact. It was going to impact a lot of people. And it was there for good reasons, but ultimately it was going to impact a lot of people. And she came to me because she was just like, how do I go into this room of people and introduce myself and kind of sell myself to them, knowing that they're all really scared and reluctant, and they're probably not really going to want to hear from me because they're asking about the fact we're going to have to do all this change. So what do I do? What do I go and talk about? Can I use storytelling? And I was like, yes, you can. So what was really interesting with her, I mean, this doesn't happen every day. She had an amazing story to tell. So I like to unpick. I'm a bit like a therapist. I'll go all the way, how was your childhood?
Yeah.
What was your relationship like with your parents? But, because every now and again you find something which is really fascinating.
Yeah.
And she told me the story about when she left university, she went to America and she was selling education books. So she was going door to door on her own, young female in America, selling these books. And, it was fairly successful. And one day she was at a trailer park. She was knocking on the different trailers and a few people answered, no, we're not really interested. And then she knocked on one trailer and the door swung open as a guy with a massive shotgun in her face,
God.
like, get off my land. And I was like, right, that is the story
Gotta use that
to tell. And she's like, I can't tell that. I was like, you can. And what was really clever about that is because telling that story, and she carried on. She backed away. She got in her car and she carried on. And that was the beginning of her sales career. And she was a really successful salesperson. So it was a really nice story about resilience. So it showed the audience in that room who were looking to her as this new leader that she was resilient, that she was strong, that she doesn't take any nonsense, but also, what it did very cleverly was it opened up a conversation in the room about fear.
Right.
And, she invited other people to share their stories of when they were really, really scared.
Right.
And in doing so, you kind of then, everybody's in this mode where they're talking about fear. And it's like, they're having a laugh, they're talking about scary moments in their lives. But it's that kind of gateway in to say, okay, so we all know about fear, and what we're about to do, what we're going to do over the next 12 months is really scary.
Yeah.
So let's just acknowledge that all in the room. But, we've all got past those fears that we've talked about. So how do we do that together? How do we move forward together? And so it's a really, great way of just, getting people on board, getting those conversations. And I think for me, storytelling, although it is part of the sales kind of technique toolkit, it is about opening up conversations and kind of, where can it go next? And I love the idea that, that's what we're doing, is we're starting conversations and we're inviting people in, and, and with customers, we're inviting them into this world, and we can be open, we can talk about these things.
And the other thing that story does is it shows real vulnerability as well. And
Yes.
I think this is often overlooked, especially, maybe I'm generalizing, but I feel men especially don't like to ever show any sign of weakness, especially older guys in business. They see that really as a flaw, that a client will say, oh, they're weak, we're not going to work with them. But the power of vulnerability is absolutely huge.
It is massive, yeah, and I'm really glad you brought that up, actually, because it is huge, and everything you've just described is so true. I think I am starting to see a bit of a shift. I think there are definitely. I think that there are lots of different types of people, and I think the more emotionally intelligent person, regardless of what gender you are, is starting to come around to that idea of vulnerability. But yeah, it's really hard to be vulnerable in a business environment. It's really hard for a female to be vulnerable in a business environment. And but it is one of the most powerful tools that we have. And when I work with small business owners, it's easier for them because it tends to just be them. And so a lot of they're talking about why they set up their business and what it means to them. And they're talking about times where they failed and kind of, so they can be more vulnerable. But at a larger level, at a big corporate level, it is really difficult. But again, I think if you can find it in yourself to show elements of vulnerability, what it does is it makes it okay for other people around you, and it makes it okay for your customers as well. So it's kind of like, you're saying, look, I'm going to share this bit, and it's okay. We're all flawed, essentially. We're all flawed characters. And so it's kind of, being vulnerable is the more realistic way to operate. When you've got someone which is just like, oh no, everything's perfect all the time.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how much we trust those people anymore.
No, I don't think we do.
I think we used to, because we didn't know another way. But I think now, again, social media, things like that, I just think that we prefer to see imperfect stuff nowadays,
I
because
completely
we
agree.
know that we're imperfect.
Yeah.
So yeah. So again, I think that's partly another reason why the hero story doesn't work so much for me, because
Yeah.
this idea of a hero on a pedestal is almost, it's not achievable. We want real people. We want, if we're hearing about a success story from an IT company, for example, we want to hear about the things that went wrong as well. We want to know what they've learned from it. We want to know that it wasn't, oh yeah, just 3 months and it was all done.
Right.
We know that that's rubbish. We
Yeah.
know how difficult these things are. And I think it's really interesting. And I've written quite a lot about the idea of an anti-hero as well. And there's quite a lot of stuff that's been being said over the last couple of years around that. And if you look to things like Netflix, you look to movies now, the traditional hero is in the shows that really work and really capture people's imagination. That hero is flawed as hell. Even the superheroes. So what's it? Deadpool. I mean, he's not, you'd say, but he is an anti-hero, but without a doubt. And and it's great because, again, what we were saying about holding a mirror up. If you've got a hero in front of you that's perfect, it's got perfect teeth, the perfect hair, and her life or his life is perfect, we can't see ourselves in them. And so we get bored and we go away. But if you've got a character, guilty pleasure of mine is Emily in Paris. I don't know if you've ever watched
I don't know that one.
It's very trashy, but it's also very interesting because it kind of tells a story. Very beautiful girl moves from Chicago to France, working in the fashion industry, all very glamorous. And you kind of think it was really like boring because, she always, she gets the guy and all this, but actually she's not that person at all. She's messy. She's really, really messy. She's flawed. She cheats on people. She doesn't know what she's doing half the time. And, and she's really endearing because I'm like, I get her, I get that we all make ridiculous mistakes and we try and learn from them, we don't learn from them, and it's all these things. And I think so as storytellers, I think it's our responsibility to show vulnerability, because I think that's the more believable, honest side of ourselves. And I think in business it's a hard place to be, but I think it's, again, I'm seeing more senior leaders doing it. I think there are some really good leaders out there who are talking more about their personal journeys, sharing kind of their earlier career, sharing the fight that they've had against certain things. And I think that really helps. And even though it might not be stories that are shared directly with a customer, when it's done in the public domain, it's creating that kind of culture. So if you see, if you're looking to work with an organization and you've watched a talk by the CEO where he's been really vulnerable, it's, and you can, you've got that connection. It's all part of that kind of that's an organization I want to work with. They're they're good people at the heart, and I get them. And so it's all, sometimes it's that kind of subconscious pieces as well as the direct story to sell.
I think it helps on a presentation front as well, as in, you can sometimes see people who are very nervous at presenting and they're trying to tell a bold story or not. And it's a bit awkward and everyone's thinking, I hope that they kind of can get through this. But on the other hand, sometimes you see vulnerable people. Emma Watson speaking at the UN, for example, she's nervous, her voice is shaking, but she tells this incredibly vulnerable story. And you just say, wow, that was one of the most powerful speeches or presentations I've ever seen. I'm glad you didn't come and tell that in a really confident way that, we might expect from an actress.
That's really interesting. I think we root for them as well, and it is where you've got someone that you think is naturally confident, and then you see them in this vulnerable state. And what was that I saw recently? Richard E. Grant, that was another one. When he presented the BAFTAs, he was really nervous, and he was shaking his note cards and everything and fluffing his words. And I just remember thinking there was a little bit of like, oh gosh, it's a bit awkward. But then I thought, you know what? It's really refreshing to see that, especially people, like actors who are, that's kind of their world, to be able to put on a face and no matter what's happening, kind of present themselves in a very strong way. even for people like that to get nervous and, to talk with emotion, it's really refreshing to see that. And I think that's, the more we see that across all areas of society, the more comfortable we will become with being more vulnerable. And I think when we can do that, I think a lot of good stuff happens. I think we can talk to people on a different level. We can, you cut the bullshit out, and it's just, you just get down to the kind of the basics of what drives people. And again, that's where those really exciting connections happen.
Yeah, I mean, we're all just humans. And I think the humans we sometimes expect to perform are also, because of that, under the most stress and pressure and the hardest conditions to perform. In your line of work, do you come across much need to talk about mental health and that stress and pressure when you're helping people to prepare for their presentations and stories?
Yeah, definitely. I think, I talk quite a lot. I mean, I've been through a whole mental health journey myself. I suffer from anxiety and panic attacks in particular, and it's really affected me over the years. But yeah, definitely, I think there's a lot more openness around mental health, which is good. And so I do talk to a lot of people as we're working through that kind of process with them. Imposter syndrome is something which really comes up a lot, and more so with men recently as well. It isn't, and I think that's probably the number one thing that's holding people back is imposter syndrome. But again, the more high profile people that speak about it.
Exactly.
Sheryl Sandberg speaks about it. We've seen, all who else? Michelle Obama. Again, these are people that traditionally we would be up on those high pedestals, but they're coming down to our level because they're saying, do you know what, I feel that too. Or the number of people in the public eye that share their mental health journey, that talk about their stories of how they've battled with things. I just think it is such an important part of our entire narrative now to be able to talk about those things and address them, because it is a vulnerable place to be as a storyteller. We've talked about vulnerability, but it's also, if you're constantly putting yourself out there, and you're putting yourself out there in the public domain, whether that's selling or on social media, there is always going to be that potential for kind of backlash. There's a potential for burnout. There's all of these things. And I was with a group of customers yesterday, and I was talking to a guy who went through a lot of mental health issues himself, and he was about 10 years ago, he used to tell his story about everything that he had been through and how he'd come out the other side. And more people were kind of connecting with it. So, will you come and speak at my event and tell your story? And he's like, this is great. Until he said about a year later, he realized he had told his story so many times that he'd been reliving the trauma. And so actually, and I've never heard that before. And it's quite an unusual thing to happen, but there is this risk. If you're constantly sharing a really difficult time in your life, it can be triggering. And, that was a quite extreme version. But I think, this is where it comes down to kind of being able to set barriers with ourselves and knowing when we need to step back for our own kind of own sanity and things. But that was quite a powerful thing he told me.
Barriers is interesting. So lots of guests I've talked about nerves and preparation. I'm sure you know a great deal about that. But one of your podcast episodes was your acceptance speech at the Oscars, which I just thoroughly enjoyed. It was very dry, tongue-in-cheek. But you mentioned barriers there as well. Can you elaborate a bit on how setting barriers is helping in this business context?
Yeah, I think barriers have been really important to me. When I had no barriers, that's when kind of I wasn't very happy and my mental health was really bad. I think it is really important to know how much you're comfortable sharing, and I think that's when I talk about barriers. kind of, what do you want to share, and what's going to stop you from sharing something else? And, this idea that we all have to share everything about our lives and yada, yada,
Right.
yada. It's just, we don't need to do that. We need to do what's comfortable with us. But I also think there's an element of kind of pushing yourself sometimes. I think,
Yeah.
we can kind of say, oh no, I can't go there because I've set my boundaries and I can't go. And that's all
Right.
scary over there. And actually sometimes when we overcome some of those barriers and we push ourselves out to those other spaces, we learn so much about ourselves, which we can then build back into our stories. So I think it's, we need boundaries, but they need to be a little bit soft and squidgy sometimes, so that we can, we can push through them and take ourselves out there a little bit. I've definitely, it's definitely impacted me over the years.
Now I'm going to put you on the spot now. We'll see.
Oh.
Over the years, you have written and heard countless business stories. I thoroughly enjoyed the one about the shotgun a second ago. Are there any others that have stuck with you over the years? Because that's the power of stories, isn't it? The memories, often, we touched on this earlier, but I remember stories that I heard in the pub 10 years ago. I don't remember the presentation I saw yesterday.
And I think with my small business clients, that's when we get the really fun stories, because again, it's just people are much more open, and stories of like being chased through the jungle, and we've got someone I'm working with at the moment that went on a big expedition through the jungle. In her 20s as well, and she was an artist in residence, so she was on this expedition and she was documenting it visually the whole way through, and being chased by monkeys.
I think the key with that is how do you then find a way to make that relevant, I think.
Yes, and definitely I get asked that a lot, of kind of like, how do I do it, do people care about stuff like that? And it's one of those things that it's an interesting anecdote, so it's a great way to start a presentation. If you've got a little funny story like that, listen to any TED talk, they all start with a story, and it's quite a nice way to introduce yourself. It's better than just kind of like, hi, I'm Hilary. But it's also, like the shotgun story, if there's things that story taught you, that's where that experience becomes relevant. So if you learned something about yourself which has now been part of who you are and how you deal with other people, or how you do your job, or the products that you make, that's where the relevancy is. It's normally less about the actual experience, more about what you've learned off the back of it, and always what that therefore means to your audience. If it means nothing to your audience, then don't tell it. Even if you think it's the funniest, bestest story in the world, don't tell it. We've all been there, haven't we? You go to a party and there's someone that's like, really loud voice and telling this story, and they think they're hilarious, and they think, and you're just like, right, okay, and why did you tell us that? And it's the same in business storytelling. We've always got to remember that. So what does it mean for me? So if you're thinking it's just a nice thing to tell, then save it for when you go down the pub, possibly. LinkedIn is one of my bugbears with LinkedIn, is that you see people trying to shoehorn stories into sales messages, and it's really annoying. There are times where I'm like, I'm not going back on LinkedIn. And I think, it's like something happens, like when the Lionesses won the football tournament, every kind of business leader was trying to use that and kind of talk about teamwork. And it's people see through that. So there's got to be an authentic relevance to your audience, and it's got to be a story that really sits within you or your business. Not, sometimes there are things that happen in the world that we can reflect on and tell stories about, but again, it should be our experiences with that reflection versus, something's happened over here and I'm just going to try and push it into the beginning of my presentation.
No, absolutely.
To make that sound good.
I mean, we've all got so many stories because they are the experiences that make us. And the nice thing about that is, if there's a story from your life that you remember, it's usually got some kind of moral or lesson at the end, because you only remember it because you've overcome a challenge. Usually you don't remember,
Absolutely.
I went to the shops and it was fantastic. You remember, I went to the shops and broke my leg. Oh my God, let me tell you about that story. What did I learn at the
Yeah.
end of it? But in the
Yeah.
same way, we can't necessarily sit down at the beginning of a pitch preparation and think, right, what are all the stories in my entire life and which one is going to resonate? So what I do is, whenever a little thing from my past pops into my memory, normally at the worst times, normally when I'm falling asleep, I write it down, and I have a notebook and I build up this library of stories, and I try and figure out what's the lesson in each of those. That's been such a fantastic repository for me that is unique to me, that I own, that I can always look back on.
Yeah, and that's great. I mean, that's a really good bit of advice. And I often get asked the same, is, how do I, how do I remember these stories? How do I
Right,
sit down and think about them? I'm like you, I've got a notebook, I've got a Trello board.
right.
So it is. And I think, sometimes we don't really know why. I put stuff in my notes. I'm like, I don't know why I've written that, but I'm just going to keep it in there.
Right,
And
right.
then it's, you'll come back to it, and your brain, there's a reason that your brain will think, oh, hang on a minute, I'm going to write that down.
Yeah.
And, then all of a sudden you'll be going into a presentation, and you suddenly think, oh my God, I can tell that
Mm,
story. That's really cool. And I think it's the same with, any kind of anecdote, any customer stories as well, because I think, again, we're certainly working with small businesses. They're, kind of think, oh, when can I talk about a certain thing that I've done with the customer, and and I keep forgetting what I've done, and just anything like that, any successes you've had, um, outside of work as well as internally to
right,
work, any
definitely.
realizations, any interactions, things that you just witness as you're going around your everyday world. Because again, often there is, you'll just naturally find the kind of the connection. And I think, as I said at the beginning, stories are all about making sense of the world around us. So sometimes it is those really kind of mundane things that we do, those little observations that we have, that actually you kind of have an epiphany moment. You're like, oh my God, that is, that's the thing that I need to talk about. And it could be,
Yeah.
I don't know, just, the dog doing something, and whatever it might
Right.
be. But it can, providing there's something really big off the back of it, or something that's really relevant, or something which demonstrates a side of you that you're trying to portray as well. Because like we say, it's all about connections. We want people to know, as a storyteller, we want people to know who you are as well,
Yeah.
and so sometimes it's those little glimpses into your life, into the way that you see the world, that helps people understand you better. So your own observations are really important in that understanding piece as
Mm.
well.
So let's talk about a hot topic of the moment, because I know, again, I feel like I've been stalking you by listening to your podcast, which is weird. But I know you have an opinion on this one, which is, should we be using AI to help us tell our stories?
Ah, yes, I do have a few opinions on that. Oh, it's a difficult one. I would say essentially no, but I don't. I come from a technology world. I spent so much of my career in technology, and I love technology. And so there were lots of writers in my kind of community on Instagram that were straight away were like, oh my God, I'm so scared for my career, and blah, blah, blah.
Right,
And then there
absolutely.
was like, oh, I'm not going to touch this. And I think because I've worked with many organizations over the years that have automation software and use robots, and kind of I've written countless papers about kind of workplace and the impact of automation on workplace and how you deal culturally with those shifts. I think I was probably in a better position not to panic quite so much
Okay.
about it. And I had a go. I was one of the early adopters of using ChatGPT, and just to play around with it. And I haven't found any purposeful way of using it in what I do. It's fun.
Okay.
It's interesting. Um, is it good for idea generation? Possibly, if you're a little bit stuck on ideas, but essentially, I don't think it can tell a story. And the reason that I don't think it can tell a story is because stories are the basis of humanity. Storytelling is a
Right.
human thing to do. Yes, an AI could write a narrative, could write the kind of the fundamentals of something, but it won't understand the nuances of emotion. Yet. I mean, maybe Elon Musk will do something.
That's next week.
Yeah. But essentially, that's it. And I think it's the emotional side of it, the feelings, the sensory part of storytelling, which is very hard for an AI to replicate. So they can tell. I have tried it, and I have said, oh yeah, can you write a certain story in a certain style? And they can, the basis is there. So structurally, their stories are right. So it's clearly, there's so many algorithms and so many structures out there. It's not difficult for them to write something that's structurally in the right order. So, maybe if you were new to this and you wanted to get away from your blank page to something, then it could be helpful to kind of put that outline. But I think if you were to use AI and send a story straight from AI out in front of your audience, it would go nowhere, because it's lacking the emotion to make the connections. And I just don't think it would work. It might work as a blog post, possibly. I don't know, probably not. But I think, proper storytelling needs to come from inside us, and it needs to come, it's all our experiences. It's the way we see the world, the way that the world makes us feel. AI doesn't get there, I don't think.
No, I think what it can help with is people who are not necessarily very good at writing, and they can stick an idea, not even an idea. You can write a story as a brain dump, and then you can ask ChatGPT, can you please make this sound better and fix the grammar and those kinds of things. I think it's quite good at restructuring things that way. But it's that assistive. It assists us rather than does it for us.
Yeah. It doesn't. I'm under no. I'm not worried about my job. Right, exactly. I'm not worried everything's going to be taken over by robots. But it can, it is good from getting from that kind of lots of scribbled notes to some structure. But I think my caveat with that, and the word of advice that I would give, is still to, even if you've taken, like you suggested, inputted all your brain dump ideas and asked it to structure a story, it still needs to be written in your voice, and that AI isn't going to necessarily know your voice. So again, it's for you to then look at and say, right, I've got it structurally. So how would I say these things? How, is that a word I would use? Voice is really, really important in storytelling because of that kind of one-to-one nature of it. And when we tell stories in written form, for example, we want that voice to be the same as ours, because there's nothing weirder than, you probably had this, you follow someone on social media and you think, oh, they sound really cool, and then you go into a meeting room with them and they're like completely different in real life, or they're really fun in a meeting room and then they follow up with some really corporate kind of like all the corporate rubbish, and you're just like, hang on, which is the real person? Right. And it doesn't help with trust. So if you kind of have those like, oh, this is a bit weird, they've got two different voices, it makes you start to question, what else are they kind of not letting on to? And so I think there is this, consistency of voice across everything that you do. So if you're using Chat AI, make sure that you then kind of rewrite it a bit with your voice. And for me, the way that I check that something's written in voice is to read it aloud. And I think it's quite a powerful thing. If you read something you've written aloud, if you stumble over certain words, it's probably because they're not your authentic voice. And so it's quite a good way of just like of getting it all out there, because it will feel gross. You'll say something, you'll be like, oh God, did I just say that? Yeah. And then you can like go, actually, you know what? I wouldn't ever say that. What would I say? And so I think that, again, with something like AI, then it is, it's just those things to help you along the way a little bit, but you still need to kind of apply yourself to it.
Now, you have a business, you've got a podcast, you do all sorts. Where can people find you? What do you want to tell people about?
Okay, thank you. Well, so I the business is 22 Stories. So you can find me on the internet, 22-stories.com. I mainly hang out on Instagram and LinkedIn. So 22 Stories and me on Instagram, and Hilary Salzman. There's only one of me in the world, so quite easy to find on LinkedIn. And yeah, so I hang out there, and I'm a big believer in sharing of content. So, you know, my Instagram channel especially, it's, you know, not everybody can afford and can access, you know, the stuff that I charge to do. And I just don't want that kind of inequality in the world. So if people can afford to work with me, and I do everything from kind of like one-to-one training and mentoring to coming in and doing big brand story workshops or personal brand stories, and, you know, writing sales material and websites and things like that. If people can afford to do that, then that's great. But if they can't, then you know, all the tools to do that, the guidance, the support is all available across my social media channels. I really, really strongly believe in that. And that's one of the big reasons why I launched The Everyday Storyteller, which is my podcast. You know, I just want people to be able to access this information and use it. The Everyday Storyteller is on all major podcast platforms. And it's a daily show. So it's Monday to Friday. It's a couple of minutes long each episode. I mean, you've listened to it. And yeah, the idea being, it's just, you know, I say it's a show for women wanting to find their voice, and with women with something to say, but it's really for everybody. You know, I can see my demographics. It's not just women that listen. And the idea being, it's just a few minutes every day, give you an idea, one thing to write about, think about, or do in your day. So, you know, gradually over listening to them, you're building that storytelling muscle. You know, I share practical tips. I share some very silly stories on there. There's a whole load of stuff from my daughter's experience with her ghost, and an imaginary egg machine, and all sorts of things. And it's just, you know, it's just a nice safe space to hang out in, and and learn a little bit about storytelling.
And I can confirm that your podcast is awesome. In fact, the way I would describe it is it's delicious, because it feels like these little hors d'oeuvres that you have in the morning, one a day.
I like that.
A little sweet treat or something. Yeah, absolutely. And once you've had one, you always want another one as well.
Oh, thank you. You're too kind.
Now, what are your final words of wisdom for anyone getting in or interested in business storytelling?
Just do it. It's not particularly, you know, I've got no great wisdom. It's one of those things. It's a muscle that you need to develop. Don't fear it. Don't think it's something big and scary. You're probably doing it already, you know, in the way that we tell stories every day. You know, come home from work, you go to the pub, we're all doing it. Don't be scared when it comes to doing it in a business perspective. Just try, start somewhere, not give up, and keep on going, and be true to yourself. That would be my ultimate thing.
Brilliant words of advice. Hilary, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on.
Oh, thank you, Danny. I've really enjoyed it.
This has been another episode of Pitch Masters. Go to pitchguy.co.uk for updates and information, or search for Pitch Guy on social media for regular videos on sales, psychology, storytelling, creativity, and much more.